Hello, patrons, and welcome to another episode from our Prestigious Pints series. We've again been trawling through our Rolodex of Agile contacts, and we came up with Lisa Crispin. And Lisa, we had a chat with her. She's based all the way over in the US, in Vermont, in the States. And Lisa has been an inspiration to myself and Geoff, and to many in the Agile community, mainly for her work with Agile testing. And she's written a couple of books, great books, Agile testing and more Agile testing. Along with her co-author Janet Gregory. And Lisa and Janet are both very much seen as kind of leading lights for quality and agile testing within our space. So we had a chat, funnily enough, about agile testing, the future of agile testing, how she got started and where she sees it's going and where she sees her role is within it. So it's great to catch up. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And we hope you've enjoyed all the other Prestigious Pints episodes, and there may well be more on the way. So stay tuned. So without any further ado, here we go.
That's cool. I wish we'd recorded that. But for the benefit of the tape, Lisa Crispin is here, and she's introduced me to a new word, a kegerator, which is something I'm now going to be putting on my birthday list. And her husband, what's the name of your husband?
Bob.
Bob has a legendary experience of brewing his own beer, and cider, or just beer.
He had a ferminator as well.
Another word.
Where you ferment the beer.
A ferminator.
Yeah.
Well, you're talking of cider. You just linked us into cider. I'm on the cider today, Paul.
Are you really?
Yeah. I've got a Browns.
Oh, wow, that looks organic.
Yeah.
Dunkerton,
Yeah.
Local cider.
Really nice.
And I'm going to be opening it with what's that? An Agile Pubcast bottle opener.
Oh, I want one.
Agile Pubcast bottle opener.
New merchandise.
That's awesome.
Prototype. It works.
You've only got one then?
No, I've got more than that. But that was the prototype. The box is over there.
Okay.
Not sure what to do with them yet, but there we go. We'll find something.
I need some of those. I need to get some of
So,
those.
yeah, Lisa, I know it's a little bit early for you, so we're not expecting you to be getting on the Raz right now.
Oh, I've been up for hours. But
Okay, feel free.
I've only had 2 mugs of tea, though. My husband's going to bring me another one because that's not enough caffeine.
Okay, cool. So we, I know you've listened to a few of the episodes, so you know that we get in trouble if we don't describe what we're drinking. So I'm drinking an organic single variety cider. I'm not quite sure whether that makes a difference or not, whether it's single variety or not, but it's filled right to the brim. It's very, very light in colour.
Oh, it's pretty. Yeah, I'm keen for cider, yeah.
That's much nicer than I've had for a while. It does say sharp with a little sweetening, and that is a pretty accurate description. My first thought was sweet, and then I got a bit of a sharpness to it. I would say it tastes slightly more orange than it looks.
Orange?
I don't know why. Yeah.
That's nice. I like the sound of that.
I had a colour, not like the fruit, the colour.
Okay.
There you go. What are you on, Paul?
As it's lunchtime here, for me, I'm being good. I'm having an alcohol-free one, Geoff.
Good for you.
But it's just Thatcher's, which is it's kind of local, I suppose, to the West Country. Thatcher's Zero.
Nice.
Which is pretty. It's fizzy apple juice. That's all it is, really. So I'm
You ever had
paying
that
an
before?
extortionate price for fizzy apple juice. But I'm having mine over ice because it's a
Good
very nice hot day. So I'm going to pour mine over ice.
So
like
Lisa,
that
you're
idea.
joining us from Vermont. Thank you for taking the time out to join us today.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
How long have you been in Vermont?
Coming up on 3 years.
Okay,
Yeah.
because the last time I saw you was in cold Colorado, wasn't it?
Yep.
We had dinner
Yep.
somewhere in Colorado.
We made the cross-country trek with all the dogs and cats and donkeys. It was very exciting.
So how did you get the donkeys?
Well, we have a horse trailer that I had specially made for the donkeys because it has room in the back for my big wagon that 2 of my donkeys pull as a team. And then it has a front compartment that's big enough for the donkeys. And the front compartment has a door that's intended for people to go in and out because the back has a ramp so we can, get the wagon in and out. And we needed to load up the wagon and then load all kinds of, food for the donkeys and all kinds of stuff. We didn't want to unload it every time we stopped. So we taught the donkeys to jump in and out the people door. And, it's a good, I'd say 1/2 meter jump. And for a little donkey that's less than 1 meter tall, that's a pretty big jump.
Yeah.
But they were really good sports. They just jumped in and out.
In my head, I was kind of imagining the donkeys pulling your wagon of goods across the Wild West.
We thought about that. It's like, well, this would make a good documentary.
Yeah.
Yeah, stick it on Netflix.
Apologies in advance, but one of my favourite jokes involves a donkey.
Oh.
And so you probably heard it before. You probably heard all of them before. But a donkey walks into the bar and the bartender says, "Hey," and the donkey says, "Yes, you read my mind."
That's very good. I hadn't heard that one.
It's very kind of you to say. My jokes are pretty terrible. Yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to put in a plug for our the local cider that I prefer here. It's called Shacksbury Cider, and it's based in Virgin, which is a little city about 15 minutes from us. So.
What's it called?
Shacksbury.
Shacksbury.
Like and so one of the things they do is there are just tons of apple trees here, and like we have 30 acres, and we have probably 20 apple trees that have just been. They're just wild, right? So they're real big, and the apples mostly are ones you want to eat. The deer eat them, but they could make good cider. And so Shacksbury will go out if people just want somebody to pick their apples and use them. They'll go and they're very interested in finding like heritage varieties and stuff, which is a lot of times what you find out on the old farms. So I think that's a cool thing they do.
Nice. I made some cider a couple of years ago, and it's amazing how many people just want you to come and get rid of all their apples.
Yeah. You hate to see them go to waste. Ours don't go to waste because the deer and turkeys eat them, and the donkeys when I'm stir myself to go pick some.
Nice. Yeah. So thank you for joining us. This we didn't really give you too much of an introduction to what you've let yourself in for. It's nothing bad, I promise. But we've done a little sort of spin-off series, if you like, called Prestigious Pints.
I'm very honored.
Not at all. We look at people who've been big influences in the Agile space over the last 15, 20 years, few years. Then your name naturally comes up. The amount of people that I've met who've said, I've reached out to Lisa and she's been very generous with her time, offering coaching and mentoring. I don't know how you fit it in because you have a day job as well as writing books and blogs. I don't know how you fit it all in, but you're sort of affectionately known as the Agile testing lady.
Well, yes, and along with Janet Gregory, my co-author and partner in crime. She's the idea person, and I'm the one who goes and makes my team try the ideas. So
Is that how do you feel about that? Because we spoke to Esther about being known as the retrospective lady, and there are upsides and downsides to that from her perspective. How do you feel about that?
It's an honor, really. I mean, there was a time, as you probably remember, Geoff, that the extreme programming community didn't think they needed any stinking testers.
Mm-hmm.
And so to have Agile and testing just in the same phrase is wonderful. We've really come a long way.
Yeah, we have.
Do you think that's because you mentioned about XP, Lisa? Then that was one of my questions. Actually, is that from my history of coaching and facilitating developers, especially, is there still that sense of animosity you think towards testing, or do you think it's changed over the last few years?
I think it's got more complex. And it just depends. As you know, there are still plenty of organizations out there that are pretty much back in the 90s in terms of how they create software. And so nothing's changed. Sometimes on Agile teams, they see the testers as the people who go off and automate all the regression tests.
Yeah. If we're lucky.
It's a real anti-pattern to me. Yeah. So if you can't code, you can't be a test. What do they call them? Automation testers. What does that mean? Automation tester. Sounds like you're testing the automation, which you should. And then I think there are more and more organizations that are embracing a DevOps culture, including all the roles working together, and they want to include somebody with testing expertise. But in that case, they only maybe want 1 or 2 for a team, or maybe 1 for every 4 teams. I don't think they need a lot. And so like there's a continuum there. It's hard to find the happy medium of having enough testers. I work on a team of, I think there are 12 of us in the team, and 2 of us are testers. But we do ensemble programming, and I just work as part of the, we call them blobs. I'm trying to get them to say ensemble instead of mob because I don't like the word mob, but blob is good. So I blob.
Is the 2 out of 12, is that a good number because of other variables? Like, so I've seen teams where the more you think of testing as a whole team responsibility rather than the responsibility of the testers, the more you can get away with fewer testers, if you like. Is that?
Well, it's if you embrace the good development practices. So in this case, they're usually practicing test-driven development. This team is not yet practicing behavior-driven or acceptance test or driven development or specification by example. I'm trying to kind of ease them that way, but test-driven development is a foundation that has to happen. Continuous integration has to happen. Working in small chunks and frequently delivering small chunks, all that has to happen. And if that's happening, and the team really is focused on quality and building quality, and yes, it's fine to have 1 testing specialist to help transfer those skills. What I find is what I bring to the party is usually things like helping them learn how to do exploratory testing, helping them to go, oh, maybe we should do some accessibility testing, or how about security testing, and just introducing them to tools that can help them, techniques that can help them. It's like, oh, let's make the testing more visible, like for this feature or this epic. We'll put in some exploratory testing charters as stories in the backlog, so that we're aware that work needs to be done, and anybody can pick those stories up and do them. So those are the kind of things I feel like I bring to the party. I mean, Janet and I have always seen testers as having a strong role as kind of a consultant, suggesting things a team can do to improve their testing, improve their quality.
How did you get started with it all, Lisa? Where did your testing background come from?
Well, I started as a programmer back in the day when it was a low-paid job, so there were lots of women. I got trained on the job, and I had a wonderful, we were doing Agile back then. That wasn't a word, and we didn't know anything. I think it was before waterfall even was invented. So, we worked collaboratively. The new crop of hires got trained by the most recent crop of hires. We had a great education program. We did a lot of pairing, and we didn't know anything about writing requirements. Certainly, we didn't even use the word testing, but it was at a university, and so if a department needed some software, somebody from there would just come and sit with us and tell us what they wanted.
Yeah.
And we used a 4GL, so we could spin it up really quickly and say, oh, how does this look? How does this look? Oh yeah, that's fine. And we even taught the people in the academic departments to do their own reports, to do their own little, forms and stuff. We had a really successful education program. So it was really, talk about collaborative. We even had our customers writing their own code. That just seemed so natural for me. And then when I left there and joined a consulting company, and we were doing waterfall, like, what is this? Like, spending weeks creating those big requirements documents. So anyway, that was yucky. So I ended up in tech support for a software company, and we were located in Denver, Colorado, and most of our developers are in Germany. And so this is back when we're just answering the phones. We didn't even have faxes yet.
Nice.
And so people are calling like, how did you not catch that giant bug in this new release? Like, oh, because we didn't know about it. We just got it at the same time you did. So we asked the developers, like, could you just send us those tapes maybe a week before you send it to the customers?
Yeah.
And so we started installing and testing them out. And so at least then when people called and all mad, we'd say, "What? We're working on a patch. We'll have it out in a couple of days. Don't worry." And our managers were like, that's an interesting idea. Maybe we could test this stuff before we send it to the customers.
What a novel idea, yeah.
So they formed kind of a testing and release department, and I put my hand up. That sounds fun. I like programming, but it was more fun to, try to suss out how's this stuff working and where are the problems and how can we fix it. So, and also I really enjoyed, like, back in the day, cutting release tapes for all the different flavors of Unix and VAX VMS and,
You say you really enjoyed the testing element. Do you think? And I speak to a lot of teams now, and and testers within the team, and I think it's an enjoyment from. I'm not going to say breaking things, but I'm going to say stressing things out and stress testing things and taking things to their breaking point. Is that true? Do you think it is a mindset thing?
I think it is. I mean, I think anybody could have that mindset, but testers are certainly, they're in testing because they have it. Like, what if I do this? What's the worst thing that could happen? Whereas people writing code have to be more focused on what's the most valuable thing here. I have to get that working. I got to get this happy path working. That's right. You should do that. But then you should start thinking about, the sad path and the edge cases, and still focused on value. That's one of the things I've fallen into over the years as a tester is, oh, I know I can smell that part of the code where the bugs probably are. And, my teams have in the past had to come to me and say, Lisa, yeah, that's cool that you found this bug. Could you just make sure the happy path works first? And so focusing on value to the customer, that's something I've really learned in the last few years. And especially now that we can get so much data on what the customers think is valuable, we can see what they're using.
Yeah.
We can put a change out and see if they engage with it, and whether they call customer support because they didn't understand it, or email customer support, whatever. So we can get all the analytics, all the data, and that's really helpful, and that helps us. We can't ever test everything, so let's hone in on the things that'll help our customers have a better day.
Yeah, it's I know that sort of things have changed, haven't they? And you can't help but change with it and see different things. I know you, like us, you went through a bit of a reflective period around the 20-year anniversary of the manifesto, and that's kind of what prompted us to do this series, really, is sort of catch up. And one of the things that we've been asking a lot of people is, what else is different for you now than 20 years ago?
Well, definitely for testing and quality, the fact that we can now test in production in an effective way and not a negative way, and get all this data and watch what people are doing and instrument our code so that when things go wrong, something completely unexpected, all those unknown unknowns, we can respond to it really fast. So I've gotten very interested in the last few years in observability. People like Abby Bangser and Charity Majors and Lin Fong Jones, and I could go on and on with all the people involved with that. I've seen the importance of that from a testing perspective, and things like chaos engineering. I mean, this is asking questions of your production system and explore it. Basically, somebody said it's tool-assisted exploratory testing in production when you have all these tools that help you instrument the code and monitor what it's doing and get traces of this user's journey through the product. That's really important. I've been trying the last few years to get testers to embrace all sides of that DevOps loop. Continuous testing loop. Janet calls it holistic testing. We need to be testing, and Dana Ashby came up with a graph a few years ago that everybody is always stealing, but showing we should test here, we should test here, we should test here. We test the ideas, we test as we code, we do some exploratory testing before we put it out there. We watch the monitors, we see what's going on. We look at the analytics, and we get that data and feed it back in. So we test all along both sides of that loop, but testers are kind of afraid to go on the right side of that DevOps loop because the tools are different. It's a big challenge. It's a challenge for me too. And just when I learn one tool, I join another company and they're using a different tool. So it's like,
How do you get people past that fear?
I'm not sure I've succeeded at it, but just trying to kind of just build a community of people who are interested in it. And like I said, people like Abby Bangser, I think because she's identifies herself as a tester, but she is an SRE in her work. I think she can explain to people how it relates. Like, she wrote a really good blog post about alert fatigue. So if your team's getting alerts all the time from production,
you
get numb to it. It's the same with failing tests.
Yeah.
We get flaky automated regression tests. You just stop paying attention. Oh, it's just flaky, just flaky. Well, it might really be a bug.
Wolf.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think stories like that can show testers it's like, it's still testing. It's just a different format. And our question asking abilities are still really valuable there. Seeing things from a different perspective than maybe the platform engineers who are embedded in it every day. So I really wanted to move more into that area, but unlike Abby, I do not have strong coding skills. And I mean, that is a limitation. I find that if a team is not already instrumenting their code, like for observability, like maybe they're instrumenting it for monitoring, but not for observability. I can't sit down and show them how.
Okay.
I can't sit down and say, well, if you used OpenTelemetry and it's really easy to do this with your code, and then you're going to see this out in Honeycomb or Lightstep or whatever tool you're using. That's a limitation. And so what we have to do as testers that aren't coders, I'm working on my coding skills, but it's really slow, is collaborate. So our collaboration skills, our communication skills, getting the platform engineers and the developers and everybody to engage with us. And, where I'm working now, there's been a real push to, it's all about the platform, and let's get the people from the platform team embedded in the development teams. And conversely, let's get some developers, some engineers from the development teams embedded in the platform team. I think that's a really great way to promote that DevOps culture instead of having a DevOps team off somewhere. And so I'm hoping it's an opportunity for me to do a lot of learning. And now somebody on my team is part-time on the platform team. And so it's easy for me to reach out to him and ask him, for help. And can you explain this to me? And how would we test this? We're about to cut over to a new subdomain, on our product. Like, oh, well, what's important to test with that? Getting help with that.
With the reliance on tools, then, Lisa, obviously tools has grown massively. Is there perhaps a risk that more tools, less collaboration, or teams might be some of the communication skills have been more secondary to the tools in the first place, do you think, or not?
I don't think that's a new problem. I mean, look at testing. It's always been, since I started testing in the early 90s, it was all about the new test automation tool is going to fix all our problems. And I think, I'm guessing that probably happens too with things like monitoring tools, or, like we use like the tool like Sentry. It's supposed to use machine learning to note anomalies and alert you about them. That's cool. I don't 100% trust that it's going to catch everything. So, you can't have a tool like Sentry and then think, we don't need those platform engineers anymore. But I think there's a tendency with the business side, we have to educate the business side, because the business executives are like, oh, no, this vendor is marketing to me and telling me that if I buy this tool, I can fire all my testers. Or I can fire all my platform engineers. Maybe I don't know if people say that, but I'm just guessing. But there's a tendency to want to buy a tool and be done, because people are hard to deal with.
Yeah, I don't think that is anything new, is it really? That's always, and to a degree, there's an element of, that's probably a good thing to a degree. That what comes to mind is that Bill Gates quote of, give me a problem and give me a lazy developer, because they would solve it in the simplest way. And if you can buy something that can do something, then brilliant. But putting all your hopes and faith and everything into a tool, even if it's got machine learning, the people need to teach that machine, right? And your circumstance is going to be different to everyone else's. So, yeah, is that the hardest thing then? Is it? What would you say has been the hardest thing about Agile testing?
I do think the hardest thing is just sort of educating people all the different ways that testing specialists on the team could help.
Yeah.
And getting people to think beyond functional testing. When I was on extreme programming teams in the early aughts, I was just as guilty as anybody else of totally focused on functional testing. It's like, well, we're doing TDD and we're doing ATDD, and we've got all these tests that captured our requirements, and they're all working, they're all passing, we have living documentation, it's great.
But they're the most visible things, aren't they? That's the visible bottleneck that we see.
Yeah. And so that's great. I mean, we were doing a great job of that. And then I went to a couple conferences in 2006, and I was in some really good talks about security testing and performance testing, and which I had done in the past. But just when I got on an XP team, it's all about, we're working on these stories and we're getting them out, and we have the regression tests, and it was a real wake-up call. I came back to my team and I'm like, maybe we should do some security performance testing. And we were a startup, right? So we hadn't reached the scale where that was affecting us yet, but we're a financial services company. So for sure, security would be important.
Yeah.
But I couldn't really get the management to pay much attention. And it's like, well, I bought a security testing book, and I immediately found some holes in our security and told people, and they're like, file a bug. And then there were some performance with, like, we need to do performance testing. We did some, like, we settled on JMeter as our performance test tool, and it's like, okay, we need to get a baseline, but we don't have an environment that looks enough like production to get a baseline that would be meaningful. So we kept asking the CEO, like, we just need to buy another machine that's a lot like production.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until the day there was one really slow query, really slow procedure behind a report in production that people only did once a quarter. So our customers only pulled this report once a quarter. Well, we finally got enough customers, and of course they all did it at the same time because it was something you had to give the government. We finally, one day, enough people pulled that report at the same time, it actually brought our whole system down. And the CEO comes running back to us and says, can't you at least put a page up saying that we're down? And we're like, what part of the whole system being down do you not understand? So the next day we had the money for our performance testing environment.
That's it. Yeah.
But we were just ignoring that, and I think a lot of XP teams working at small startups went through the same kind of thing. And then they kind of woke up and it's like, ooh, all these other forms of exploratory testing, people were probably doing it, some, and not having a name for it, but not realizing there are a lot of good techniques, things like what Elizabeth Hendrickson has in her book, Explore It, of, writing exploratory testing charters and playing the nightmare headlines game. What don't we want to see on Twitter tomorrow after we release?
Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? I can't possibly name anybody associated with this. Let's call it a hypothetical story, where to get that sort of management buy-in for increasing quality and increasing redundancy, they basically paid a friend to play the role of a reporter, gave them a senior manager's email address, and said, look, I hear there are a number of security flaws in your product that's affected data and your users. Do you have any comment on that? And as soon as they got that email,
what a great idea!
But it's a similar kind of thing to the Twitter headline thing, isn't it? It's that in terms of getting senior people's attention, it usually comes down to reputation and am I going to be labelled with this? And they can't see it until it happens because we have a loss aversion. We have a sort of that kind of I don't want to just ignore it. I'm in denial. Have you come up with any better techniques over the years for because it is a difficult thing, isn't it, to get support for?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you just have to let the train wreck, like in that case. Sometimes it's potential business partners for the company that come to the rescue because they're like, okay, we're going to do a security audit. Oh, that's how my security bugs got fixed.
Yeah.
We came with a partner came in and said, well, we want to do a security audit and a penetration test. And they were like, ooh, maybe we better clean up what we know about first.
And so that was a case of somebody saying, we're not going to do business with you unless you let us do this. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's been something I've wrestled with for the last few decades of how do we educate management? Certainly up to us. I think concepts like technical debt are pretty easy to explain because you can boil it down to money.
Yeah.
Here's how much it's costing you, or here's how much our velocity is slowing down. They love, I'm not a huge fan of velocity as a metric, but if you've got a team that's pretty consistent and the velocity is pretty meaningful, you can say, look at our velocity going down. We need a couple weeks just to focus on our technical debt and not deliver any new business features. Well, we do that, and you can make a case for it. They understand it. But it's hard for us to learn how to speak the language of the business sometimes. I really like Oase Peer and Ronald Cummings John's book, Leading Quality, because it's more about, how do we make this case to the executives, since they themselves had a startup which failed because the quality was bad. So that's how they learned. But they know how to put it in business terms because they're business people who learned about quality the hard way. And so I think we're learning more about how do we educate executives, and it's something we need to do. And making quality visible, that's one thing I've always tried to do. How can I make people understand? Very few companies, they all say they want good quality. Very few companies know why it's so important, how much investment you need, and why that's so important, and how it pays off. And I think one of the problems is it only pays off in the long term usually. And at least in the United States, it's all about, especially for public companies, it's all about your profit for this quarter. So it's really hard to get people to make long-term investments.
You talk about exposure and transparency and the cost of these things. It just reminded me of that story. I think it was yesterday, wasn't it? Where all those internet companies went down from was it Fastly servers went down?
Oh, Fastly, it went down yesterday,
And it was like massive companies, just all of a sudden all their website traffic just closed. I don't know the full details about why it happened. I think it was
there was something real embarrassing and controversial.
But exactly,
but I don't know what it was.
You can imagine that somebody somewhere got fired for whatever it was that happened, a plug that got pulled out, or whatever it was, or an update that's gone in, or a test that's failed. I imagine somewhere that hasn't been captured.
And I mean, those things are so public now. I was listening to the Roland Garros radio, the French Open tennis. And they were talking, the commentators were like, exactly. So a lot of the internet is down. They don't know anything. They're like, it's this company Fastly. They don't know even what that company is, but they know the name. And these are not computer literate people.
And all of a sudden the spotlight's on, and that need for resilience, isn't it? And how quickly you can get these things back online. But
and a few weeks ago, Salesforce went down everywhere. And our product where I work is based on Salesforce, and it was down for hours. But what really bugged us was Salesforce was like blaming one engineer.
Really?
And it's like, you know what? Somebody might have made a mistake. Why was it possible for them to make that mistake? Why have you not built your system to guard against human error?
That reminds me of one of the Geoff. That reminds me of one of the nicest things that I think it was J.B. Rainsberger said at a conference years ago. But said, let's stop calling them bugs. Let's start calling them mistakes, because no developer intentionally puts things in there, bugs to break the system. They're just mistakes.
Well, I've known one or two, but
but I think that's even just people pay a lot of attention to the language that and that blame, thinking you've created a defect, an error in our system, but in fact it might just have been a genuine overlook or a mistake.
Well, I've got to be careful here. I'm going to branch off into a dangerous little area, but it is very related. And again, I'll keep things anonymous, but I have known a couple of companies who have actually used the negative publicity deliberately. So they will release something knowing that it's going to fail, or a website's going to crash, or what have you, and know that they can recover it very, very quickly to get that negative attention, and then turn it into we recovered it really quickly. But because you get that company name out there, you get the fact that they've launched something, and demand was so high that the website crashed, but they've got it back on. Do you know what I mean? And
so there's no negative publicity, or what's the saying?
Well,
there's such thing as bad publicity.
That's right.
There is if you can't recover from it, or if you make it worse. But they had a plan in place to create some negative publicity so that they could turn it positive, and I think that's quite clever but manipulative.
Interesting. Well, and this is the thing which I think in the book Leading Quality they talk about this. That I've worked for a startup where they knew there were a lot of bugs. They were really good at observability, so they could really quickly detect problems in production, and they had a really fast deployment pipeline, so they could get fixes out really fast, or they could revert really fast. And so they were not really testing anything. They weren't doing test-driven development. They automated a bunch of UI tests in a very poorly designed way, and didn't have any testers. it was fine for a while, because when you just have a handful of customers and you can hold their hands, say, don't worry, we'll have that bug fixed in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
That's fine. But when you start wanting to get some big enterprise customers, it just doesn't work. And I've heard that company now has a team of like 10 or 12 developers that all they do is triage and fix bugs.
That is wow.
Not the approach I would take.
Yeah.
All about bug prevention. I mean, it's good to detect them, but it's better to prevent them.
Lisa, what is your general advice then? Because it links slightly to that, your comment just there, on a team who has a backlog, but they also, so they've got features side by side with bugs, defect management, maintenance of the current system. Do you have any advice about how to split that time, or because there's several different ways to do it, I suppose, but do you have a preference as to how to manage that time effectively?
Well, I'm hoping that team knows how to self-organize, is allowed to be autonomous and figure out a good way that'll work for them. What has worked for my teams? I joined a team back in 2003 that had decided the co-founders of the company, who knew nothing, their whole business depended on the software. Their business model depended on the software, but they didn't know anything about software. So they were failing, and they found out, well, Agile development, that's good. So they hired Mike Cohn, really good at Agile development. But when I joined the company, the day I joined, there were 17 showstopper bugs.
Right.
And there were, I don't know, hundreds of high bugs, and then, many more hundreds of medium or whatever. And so what we decided to do, well, obviously the showstoppers had to get addressed. And then, what happens is the customers start filing things as showstoppers, because otherwise you get no attention. So, of course, it's back in our co-located days. I don't know how you could do the same thing online and be creative, but we got a police light that was in our area. And so if anybody on the operations side, customer support or whoever, wanted to do a showstopper, they had to come turn the light on. So they weren't going to embarrass themselves and turn the light on for something that wasn't really serious. So that slowed down and gave us time to fix the showstopper.
We won't ask how someone got their hands on a police light from the top of the car. We
you can get them off Amazon.
Yeah. I'm sure.
It didn't make noise. It just flashed.
Okay, right.
But it was annoying. Well, it did make a noise, but it wasn't intentional. It had a squeak to it. And then we said, okay, we're going to do so many story points, and then collaborating with the product owner. We're doing Scrum. So many story points, a sprint to devoted to the bugs. So we asked the business people to prioritize the bugs in order. And so we had this long list of high bugs, and we'd fix a few every sprint. We'd show at the demo, we fixed these bugs, and they'd be very happy. And of course we were also doing the Strangler Fig pattern, and I had a new architecture, and all the features we were implementing brand new were working. So that was making them happy. So we finally got through it took us a few months. We got through all the high bugs. And so then we're like, cool, we'll start on the normal bugs. So at the next demo, we're like, okay, we fixed these 10 normal bugs. And they were like, what? Why are you worried why are you spending any time on those?
Yeah.
We want new features. We don't care about the normal bugs. Oh. And, that's a business decision. And I think people get really caught up if we had to fix all the bugs that are in the backlog.
Yeah.
You know what? You need to probably throw away most of the bugs that are in the backlog. And, there's been a lot of debate over the years. Should we even have a bug tracking tool?
Yeah.
I think the goal is not to need it.
Yeah.
So that was our approach. But, there could be a lot of ways to do it. Maybe having a team of people. But the problem is, when you put other people in charge of fixing the bugs, the developers who made those mistakes, as you say, are not feeling the pain.
Yeah.
They don't care. Somebody else is going to worry about it. It's the same with testing. If the developer's not involved in testing, they're oblivious to all the problems.
You're right. And the greater good, of course, is, like you mentioned before, is that try to create more of a culture around quality. If that's the case, you would hope it may be a bit of a utopian dream, but maybe less bugs, certainly, and less errors to have to address. Yeah, if we're all paying attention to quality.
And the other thing is, who wants to spend their career fixing bugs?
Oh yeah, nobody really wants to be in a support team, surely. That's
maintenance.
Maintenance team.
I mean, I quit my first programming job because for budgetary reasons. We'd done a prototype. It's back in the 80s. We'd done a prototype for the first online catalog for the University of Texas Library. This is when online catalogs were a new thing. And the prototype was a huge success. So we're like, okay, we're ready to do the real thing. Let's go. There's no budget. So you will be maintaining COBOL programs for the next year until the next budget rolls around. And I was like, no, I won't.
Good for you. No, thank you.
So I'm going to link that to a couple of other things that you said. So you mentioned you didn't taking that step. I think you said was rather flippantly there, but I think there was a lot more bravery involved in that than just saying no, I won't be, because leaving a job.
I was young.
Yeah. But still, you look back at it and you think, no, it was, yeah. But at the time, I'm sure there was a lot more bravery involved in taking that decision. You also mentioned Mike Cohn, and I'm going to link those two together with the other thing that I associate with you, which is not just testing. So you've sort of stood up for quality over the last 20 years, been a leading light for quality in agile teams and software development, which is not quite a thankless task, but it's a pretty hard task.
It's causing some grief.
Yeah. And the other thing that I associate with you is your support for women in tech, which again is not quite a thankless task, but it's another pretty tough task. And we've interestingly, while I thought about that, I just looked through the people that we've interviewed so far. So you are our 9th person, and 5 of them are female that we consider to be our biggest influences in the agile world over the last 20 years. So would you say that things have changed? I know they've probably still got a long way to go, but would you say they have changed?
I think there's more awareness, but I still think that even the leading women that you have interviewed, I don't think their voices is heard at the same level as the men in similar experience and similar skills.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of awesome men like yourselves that I follow and listen to your podcasts or look at your tweets, read your blogs. I don't necessarily amplify those on Twitter because I want to spend my Twitter amplification with the women who are doing similar things, who are not getting mentioned as much.
Sure.
And that's just to try to even it up a little bit.
Yeah.
But I mean, I will if I was like, wow, I learned something awesome from Geoff or Paul. I'm gonna spread that word, but I'm focused on amplifying women's voices still, and minorities as well, of course. But it has changed. I mean, some of the things in the testing community, years ago, I think it was Deborah Pruce who gave me this idea of pairing with people to speak, because I knew a lot of young women who were submitting to the Agile conference or whatever, and they didn't have a lot of experience speaking, and they just get turned down because they weren't big names.
Yeah.
Like, I can use my power for good. I mean, I don't think I'm that big a name, but I could get accepted to a conference. And so I started pairing with them. It's like, okay, I am going to do this workshop, but I'm going to have this person do it with me. Is that okay? Will you comp them too? Oh, okay. And so that was a great way to get more women into it. And then the Fiona Charles and Anne-Marie Charrett started Tech Voices, which was originally called Speakeasy or Speaking Easy, but they had to change the name because somebody already had it. So they started a mentoring program, and it was open to everybody, but really they were focused more on trying to help women. And it's like, if you want to be a speaker, we'll provide you a mentor. And then they went one step further, which is really the smart part, is they went to conference organizers. And they said, would you reserve some sessions for these new speakers, these new voices? And some really enlightened conference organizers were like, sure. And maybe they'd have a whole new voices track.
Yeah.
And some of them even started preserving keynote slots for the new voices. And if you looked at testing conferences 10 years ago, even, you might see a lot of women on the program speaking, but not in the keynote positions, not in the tutorial and workshop positions. And now when you look, not all, unfortunately, but a lot of conferences, the landscape has really changed. So things like that have really changed. Companies that make an effort are hiring more women. The company where I work is very transparent about admitting that their numbers of women in tech are terrible.
Yeah.
But just in the last quarter, or I guess so far this year, they've hired a lot of new women, and they're really focused on that, and people of color as well. So not every company does that. Not every company makes a sincere effort. They go, well, it's just too hard. We have to know. I mean, we all have unconscious bias.
Yeah,
I have it too. I'm statistically more likely to want a male candidate over a female candidate, even though consciously that's not what I want. It's hard to work against that bias, and we have to do a lot of extra work. So it's kind of an uphill battle, but I think it's changing. You know, the people I'm working with, of course, everybody I work with is right out of school, and so it's exciting.
Feels like it anyway.
We just had a new developer join the team this week. She just graduated. She had worked one summer as an intern where I work, and so we were in our ensemble yesterday, or blob. and the people, I was somebody I haven't worked with that much before in the ensemble, and they were not doing test-driven development. I was like, huh. And they were acting like they were done with the story. I'm like, well, do you have any unit tests? Well, no. And you know, I could tell them thinking, and you know, I'm new to the company, and I'm not the coder, so I don't feel like I can tell them what to do. But this young woman who just graduated, it's like, well, no, we really need tests for this reason and that reason, and you know, and here's the way I think we should do it. And she was really standing up for quality there, and she just came out of school. I don't know if they're doing a better job in universities or that was just her, but it's very exciting for me to see the younger people coming out and really championing good practices.
Yeah, I think you've done a hell of a lot to help that. And so for one of the reasons we got you here is just to say a massive thank you, not just from our perspective, but from the whole industry's perspective for all the hard work.
It's been a collaborative effort. You know, of course, me and Janet and a lot of other people that have helped with that effort.
And if all those people were here, we'd say thank you to them as well. But we want... Don't put down your part in that, because I know you're one of the most humble people that I've ever met. And that young lady who was standing up for quality probably didn't realise that you were the person that wrote the book she read in university.
Oh, I don't know if she read the book,
but yeah, it's cool. What I know we've used up a lot of your time already, but what do you see as the sort of next challenges that we need to address from a quality perspective?
I think really getting more organizations to embrace continuous delivery or continuous deployment, whichever flavor that you want. Embracing the idea that if we did small changes more frequently, we would have a lot less risk. We'd be able to manage our work better. We would not have some big ball of mud waiting for us right before release.
Yeah.
It just seems so obvious, but I mean,
how do you see that and think, what? How can you think like that anymore? This is 2021, for Christ's sake.
I know. I look at when did continuous delivery with Jez Humble and David Farley's book came out in 2009 or 10.
I was going to say it's over 10 years ago, isn't it?
Yeah. Why? But you know, you could say the same thing about XP. Why are not more people not doing TDD, for example? But it's like, yeah. Change is slow. It seems really obvious to us, but I've learned from Linda Rising that our human brains, we don't make decisions. We don't change our minds based on logic and facts.
True.
It's all about values, and those are really hard to change. So I think that's one reason, and I use her and Maryland's Mann's fearless change patterns a lot, because I know I can't just tell people, well, if we did this, good things would happen.
Yeah.
I have to think of other ways to influence people.
Even though you actually could, because you have literally, with Janet, written the book on testing.
That doesn't cut any ice that the teams I work on, though. That's
I know what you mean.
That's it's kind of embarrassing. It's like, you know, I go to conferences all the time and tell people, and they go, oh yeah, and they shake their heads, and I tell my team that, and they go, there's just like silence. So.
What do you think even now, Lisa, is the biggest misunderstanding about Agile testing?
Ooh, good question.
Ooh, that is a really good question. Hard to pinpoint just one. I think interestingly enough, I think that maybe the biggest misunderstanding comes from the testing community or parts of the testing community that think that somehow agile testing, that they don't embrace all the testing activities on the spectrum, and they're just focused on functional testing, and that it's kind of shallow. I mean, agile testing is just testing. I'm not one for labels. I think years ago, it was about 2001, I was at a conference talking to Kent Begg. It was a testing conference, and he told me, he said, because I said, why did you call it extreme programming? This is really a terrible name. And he said, well, I hope in 10 years, people would just say it's a good way of developing software.
Yeah.
But nobody did.
The word extreme would be dropped. It'd just be called programming, right?
Yeah. And, then we got Agile, and people really latched onto that. It's something else about human brains, I guess. We just need labels.
We do, yeah. I think you're right.
So I just wish people wouldn't focus on the label Agile. I can't remember who wrote the blog post, but somebody wrote a blog post about how oftentimes it's the other big exciting thing is DevOps, but it's often a DevOps transformation that gets the team engaged in agile practices. It's like, well, we want to do continuous delivery. Yeah. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
To do that, we have to use really good development practices, and start. Well, we have to cut our features down into really small stories, and get that cadence going. And
that's arguably for me the more effective way of things happening, because it's driven by value then, rather than driven by this is how we want to develop software or this is how we want to build a product. No, this is what we need to be able to be effective. This is what we need to be able to be responsive, to be able to serve our customers, to be able to get to market quicker and so on, and it drives the need that way.
So when y'all go into a company as a consultant or coach, like how do you try to influence them to embrace those values and practices and principles?
We're pretty similar in a way, in that we've graduated away, a little bit like what you said, really, and we've graduated away from saying, we've got some expertise, we've got some knowledge here, and this is how you should do it, to, so what are your pain points? Why do you need any kind of help at all? And trying to not make it come across as, well, you're silly to be experiencing these problems, like I've been flippantly saying it's 2021, why are you experiencing that? But it's quite easy to slip into those problems when you're in the day-to-day challenges of running a business, right? So it's a case of, don't feel silly, where are our challenges, and how, what can we tweak and what can we change to make things a little bit less painful for you, but also be aware that actually what's presenting as the issue right now might not turn out to be the real issue.
Right.
So that's pretty much where I start, is your challenges, yes, they're unique, but also they're pretty similar to a lot of others, and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I think those coaching skills are so important. I don't feel like I have that talent to sort of step back and observe and then ask the pointed questions that get people thinking. How do you develop those skills?
Deliberate practice, I think, with anything else. Like you said around testing being you said about asking questions, your question asking ability. It's about giving yourself the license, the permission to ask those questions, and sometimes that takes a little bit step away from zeroing in and lasering in on the actual real problem and solution, and saying, what about if, and what about that, and what about this? And so I think that's something that I've always enjoyed over time, and it's something I've had to work on because I have a natural desire to solve problems, but I get my problem solving kicks elsewhere now, not within the work environment.
And I think Geoff, contrary to you mentioned it's 20 years, you think how can people not have understood this now 20 years on? But to a degree, I think even 20 years on, it's more acceptable now, even though we know more, we've got more history of an agile approach, but it's even more acceptable for me to say I don't know, because nobody really knows yet. There's so many, every company is different, every approach is different, and we don't really know yet what's going to work for you, because we don't really know what the problem is fully yet. So I think I've become more comfortable with saying I don't know, or I don't think anyone knows yet.
Yeah, it's a balance, isn't it? Because I can absolutely empathise with those leaders or managers who say I've got this challenge, and you've got somebody who has got 20 years in the game, and they're calling themselves this kind of role, and yet they say I don't know. What do you think? I can absolutely empathise with the flimsiness of that. But equally, I think they've been burnt so many times by someone coming along and saying, "No, this is the answer. You know, this is the nirvana. This is the snake oil, or what have you," and realizing that actually, as tempting as it is to believe that and to grasp onto it, they know that it's false certainty. So it's giving them that sort of, not quite middle ground, because it probably is slightly towards one extreme rather than the pure middle, but the sense of, I've got some experience, I've seen failure patterns, I've seen success patterns, and I can acknowledge the fact that in general, you're pretty similar to every other organization because you're just dealing with people and complexity, but you also have your own sort of unique challenges, and it's about finding out what works for you from this list of patterns. And I think I look back at the people who've inspired me over the years. They haven't been dogmatists. They've been people that have that have said, you know what, this can work in this situation, this can work in this situation, but I'm not going to say it's going to work everywhere. And here are some techniques that you can use, but the best thing is to probably try them and tweak them and make your own. That seems to be a common thread in the people that have inspired me over the years. And yourself being one of them. Who would you say has inspired you over your career?
Oh, so many people. I mean, when you were just what you were just saying, it reminded me, getting to work for Mike Cohn back in the early aughts. He's also a wonderful coach, and he knew how to help our team become self-organizing or autonomous. And I don't think people realize how difficult that is for a team. Like, we'd have all these problems. I'm sure he knew the answers. Like, he probably knew something that would work, but he wouldn't tell us. He would just ask the questions and, well, what's the biggest thing in your way? And he would sort of coach us to solve our own problems. And I don't think enough people do that. I mean, certainly, like, Linda Rising has inspired me a lot, because I learned from her, lots of things about the unconscious biases and stuff, but also about the small experiments, like identifying your biggest problem. And of course, we have people like Esther Derby and Diana Larson to give us great ideas for retrospectives, so we can do that.
Yep.
And then think of some small frugal experiment that you can do for, a week or two, and see if it helps chip away at that problem. And how would you measure it? And that's the hard part. How are we going to measure it? And so that's what I try to bring to my teams and get them, let's just try this. And the teams that do try it and start chipping away at their problems with those small experiments, I feel like those have become the most high-performing teams. But, often I run into an organization where they think they haven't been doing a good job of retrospectives, so that retrospectives are useless, a waste of time. That's their view.
Yep.
Yeah. To me, it's the most important thing you can do.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to get people to do it when they've had a terrible time. So, like, where I work now, I learned a lot at the beginning of the pandemic. I'd already facilitated partially remote retrospectives, where some people were on site, some people were other places said, and we turned those into fully, like, everybody being online for it. But I learned a lot about good ways to get people engaged when everybody's remote. And I can't think of their name, but they're two women from South Africa who have a book and I think a video course on.
Jay Allen and
yes.
Kirsten.
Yes.
Kirsten Clayton.
Yes. I learned about them from Louise Perold and got their book, and just such simple ideas, but so transformative. And I've used those in the remote workshops, which I find them very stressful, doing remote workshops for conferences.
Very different.
Everything takes twice as long, and my God. But like, I joined this new company, and they were using a Confluence document to take notes while they were having a retrospective, and I was just like, oh well, let's try. We have these Google Slides and virtual sticky notes, and let's write on the virtual sticky notes. And I mean, they were just like, whoa, this is awesome. And I happened to show it to some people in other departments or other teams, and several teams have now adopted that. It never occurred to them before that if everybody could write on sticky notes, just like they used to do in the office, people would feel more comfortable, talking about things, and maybe be able to identify what is the biggest problem that we have. So sometimes it's just the simplest ideas. So yeah, people who know how to do remote facilitation lately have influenced me a lot.
Brilliant. Absolutely. Yeah, they're fantastic. They're absolutely.
I mean, when the pandemic hit, Janet and I have our Agile testing for the whole team course, and we're like, it's an on-site course.
Yeah.
Janet was able to transform it in like 3 weeks to be fully remote with all the same exercises. But we had to cut out a lot of content because
it takes longer.
You can't do it all. People can't be on Zoom forever. I mean, of course you can break it up and have it more days and fewer hours each day, but yeah, there's some real challenges there. Awesome. So every time we think we're solving some problems, new ones come up that we didn't expect.
And that's the beauty and the frustration of life in one, right? Cool. Well, absolutely. It's amazing how time flies, right? We've already been talking for over an hour, and we are very conscious of the fact that you've donated your time so generously.
Thank you very much, Lisa.
Oh, well, I'm happy. It's just fun to talk to y'all. I wish we could get in a real pub and have a beer, and you could give me more tips on coaching.
I'm sure it won't be long.
Influencing people, because I do struggle with it.
I'm sure.
And I mean, like I say, I feel I look at the books that Janet and I wrote, and I'm like, wow, did we write that? It sounds really good. And yet on a day-to-day basis on my own team, it's like I'm a tester on a team. I have terrible imposter syndrome, and they're not going to do something because I said so. So I have to be smart about how can I influence them? Who are my allies? Who could help me get something going? It's a struggle.
Well, it's a strange thing, isn't it, that you've influenced thousands of people away from where you are, and yet the people you're working with, it's a little bit harder. But I think that's pretty common as well. But you have influenced a huge number of people fantastically, and the industry as well. So thank you again for that. And we raise an empty glass to you, Lisa. But next time.
All right, I'll raise my tea, my builder's tea.
It will be a full glass. But thanks again.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Great to meet you. See you soon.
Thank you.